Every day, every morning, every night, I've got to look for predators. It's always a challenge, just staying alive day to day.
Back there in the room, I'd just gotten to sleep and heard heavy. You can tell the footprints.
One lost his life in a fire. Another buried both her sons before cancer came and took her as well. Others were either left bleeding in the wilderness, facing legal battles, or getting betrayed by the show that used them up and threw them away. This is Life Below Zero, a show about how people survived alone in the Alaskan wilderness. It made them household names, yet also led to major tragedies. These are just 10 of them, and one involves a murder that still hasn't been solved to this day. Gary Muellberger. Right before his passing, Gary had survived 40 years in one of the most isolated communities in America. He had endured the floods, the winters, the years of living without a safety net. But in the end, what took him was a fire in his own home, and the rest of the island had no way to reach him in time. As we'll see, many frightening things led to his passing. Gary at this point had lived in port protection for decades before the cameras ever pointed his way. This was a place where most Alaskans had never visited. It lacked standard electricity, so people relied on wood stoves, propane, and diesel. Little did they know that a major tragedy would unfold because of this. Yet, in the meantime, Gary fished from a century-old boat and was so knowledgeable about the land that the 60 people on the island called him the village elder. Gary had a dog named Trapper and lived a relatively healthy life for a man in his mid-70s. But everything changed on March 17, 2021. At 11:30 in the morning, Alaska State Troopers received a report of a fully engulfed residential fire in port protection. One person was unaccounted for, and the community knew the hard way. The fire is believed to have started while Gary was working on his propane hot water tank in his home. By the time anyone could reach the island, the rough weather had delayed the investigation by days, and when authorities arrived, the house was ash. When the debris was cleared, human remains were found inside. The state medical examiner confirmed on March 25th that they were Gary Muellberger. He was 75 years old, and what he endured is just one out of many cases. Sue Aikens. Her mother abandoned her in rural Alaska when she was just 12 years old. And from that age, Sue Aikens survived alone, raised herself, and built a career in the wilderness, only to get her skull fractured by a grizzly bear. She was left injured and alone for 10 days before any help could arrive at the scene. Yet all that only scratched the surface of what happened to her. The famous bear story began back in 2007 when a young grizzly had been burying caribou carcasses near her helipad at Kavik River Camp. This was about 500 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Sue kept removing the carcasses, and the bear kept returning. One day, she went to the river to pump water. She'd put her rifle down to use both hands on the pump, and it was right at that very vulnerable moment when the massive grizzly bear came off the riverbank, lunged at her, and took her off. It clamped its jaws on her skull, dislocated both hips, tore at her arm, and dragged her into the tundra. She played still so the bear would stop attacking. And the next thing she did was unbelievable. Not long after it dropped her, Sue crawled back to camp, reset her own hips, sewed the wounds in her head closed, went back outside, shot the bear, and then called for help. It was a major victory over certain death, but there was a bigger problem to deal with. Though she had called for help, nobody came for 10 days, and she remained alone and quiet in her cabin, with bite marks in her skull and stressed hips she had physically forced back into their sockets herself. When the plane finally reached her, she was still alive. That story made the news, but this was what most people weren't told. As it was later disclosed, Sue was 12 years old when her mother moved the two of them from Chicago to a property 50 miles outside Fairbanks, Alaska. And then her mother left for untold reasons. She abandoned Sue there on that property and did not come back. Sue at the time was just a girl at 12, alone, and at least 50 miles from the nearest city in Alaska. Despite this, all on her own, she enrolled herself in school, built a routine, and found a way to survive without an adult to show her the ropes. Yet, that wasn't all. Sue later said her life had been full of pain and full of abuse long before the wilderness was involved. She had multiple surgeries over the years of the show. This included the 14 screws and 2 titanium plates after a snow machine crash shattered her collarbone in 2015. After that came the devastating spinal surgeries in 2020 and 2024, and then the complications from an infection reopening a wound from a decades-old bear bite. Like all that wasn't enough, another tragedy was on the horizon. Carly Aikens. Sue Aikens had a granddaughter named Carly. At the time, she was 27 years old, and for an absurd amount of time, she had left home, and no one was able to reach her. The authorities were called in soon enough to investigate, and after a while, Carly's car was found, but without her body. And on March 10, 2023, a body was discovered near the Tanana River. State troopers confirmed it was Carly, and there were clear signs of foul play. The young woman was murdered, but no one knew who did it, and the case was opened as a homicide investigation. Yet, as of June 2026, no one knows who the person was or where they went hiding. And even through the making of this video, the case remains open. Jesse Holmes. This man left his home and everything he had just so he could volunteer to help people in a village that had just suffered a massive flood. He was not paid by the people or the network to do this, and in the process, he had an accident that broke his collarbone, fractured his ribs, and almost destroyed his wrist. Yet the massive network that used him didn't seem to care. Jesse Holmes had arrived in Alaska and lived in Brushkana with 40 sledge dogs. He spent his seasons fishing, hunting, and racing the Iditarod. He loved nature, especially animals, and that showed season after season, but that was only until the day he nearly died because of it. In September 2022, a typhoon called Merbok caused massive flooding across coastal Alaska. Villages were underwater, and many residents lost everything. Jesse loaded up and drove to Golovin to receive assistance from other mushers to help with provisions, rescue, recovery, and rebuilding. He was not paid to be there, but went because people needed help. Yet, while working a debris removal job on September 28th, something collapsed on him. The injuries were catastrophic, from a fractured wrist and broken ribs to a broken other arm, internal bleeding, and a broken collarbone that needed immediate surgery. And here was the detail that sat wrong with a lot of people who heard it. When Jesse got injured, he had no health insurance, but had spent years as one of the leading cast members of a National Geographic Emmy-winning show. Yet when the moment came, there was no safety net provided by the network. Instead, all of his surgeries, medical attention, and recovery were only made possible by supporters who launched a GoFundMe campaign that raised over $47,000 for Jesse before it closed. Yet, this betrayal felt nowhere as horrific as this next one. Chip Hailstone. He was the ultimate survivor, the man who raised 7 children in one of the most remote places in America. He taught them to hunt and survive from the time they could walk. Yet all it took was one confrontation with a state trooper that sent him to prison for 15 months, while his family was left alone to hunt through the winter without him. Many things stood out about this man from the get-go. For one, He was not Alaskan by birth, born in Kalispell, Montana in 1969. He came north as a teenager with no real plan. Yet what he found in a small Inupiaq village above the Arctic Circle was a way of life that seemed to call out for him. Longing for this way of life, he learned to hunt, learned to fish, and put himself in situations that forced him to survive in the harshest places Mother Nature could make. During that process, he met Agnes, an Alaskan woman whose connection to the land went back centuries through her family. So he stayed and raised a family with her. By the time life below zero found the Hailstone family, Chip had 7 children, 2 stepsons, and 5 daughters who grew entirely on what the land provided. Audiences loved the family because the love between all of them felt visible and real. Then July 2011 arrived, and a private quarrel between Chip's stepson and daughter and another family in Norvik brought in the Alaska State Troopers. But that wasn't the part that stood out the most. After the authorities arrived, Chip openly claimed that one of the troopers had physically gone after his daughter Tinmiak. The trooper denied it, and the court sided with the authorities. This, to them, meant Chip was a liar. So in June 2017, the man was convicted on 2 counts of felony perjury and 1 count of making false statements to police, and he was sentenced to about 15 months in the Anchorage Correctional Complex. Chip's family was left to strive alone in the harshest winter. But this next person was not only stranded, but abandoned. Glenn Villeneuve. This is the man who spent 6 years living alone above the Arctic Circle with no electricity, no running water, and no backup plan. Yet the people who filmed it all for profit fired him with a phone call and no farewell episode. The hardships he endured were unbelievable. He left Vermont at 30 with no plan and no backup, drove north until the roads stopped, and kept going on foot. He settled 65 miles above the Arctic Circle in Chandalar, Alaska, a place so remote that most maps do not even label it. For most of the year, he had no other person for miles in any direction. He survived only on the animals he caught, the ones he trapped, and what he built with his own hands out of whatever the land gave him. The show found him in Season 1, and for 6 consecutive years, he became one of its most beloved figures. Some fans point out that Glenn was one of the few people on the show who seemed genuinely unbothered by whether anyone was watching. He had built his own log cabin, raised children in one of the most unforgiving places on the continent, and often walked into wolf territory and came out unharmed. Now this is what made what happened in 2019 so difficult to watch. After season 11, the producers called Glenn and told him that they did not have anything for him to do on the show anymore. No warning or build-up, not even a final episode where audiences could say goodbye. They simply stopped returning his calls until they officially confirmed it was over. Glenn later described the moment on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast with obvious pain. He had given that show years of genuine access to his real life, and the response was a phone call telling him he was no longer needed by the network. Kate Rourke Bassich. She was the survivor who gave up her entire life at the time to follow a partner into the Alaskan wilderness, only to leave after years of what she described as physical and mental abuse. She met Andy Bassich in Dawson City in 2003 while he was working as a riverboat captain and she was visiting for the first time. She grew very fond of him and made the wild decision to stay in the wilderness. They built a cabin together on the Yukon River near Eagle, ran a dog mushing school with at least 25 sledge dogs, and eventually became 3 of the founding cast members of Life Below Zero way back in 2013. While the cameras have the alleged illusion of a couple who moved through the wilderness with discipline and mutual respect, The reported secrets going on behind the cameras left were beyond horrifying. So when Kate left in season 5, the audience assumed it was another private divorce like many others and moved on. But what Kate Bassich later described in interviews was something far darker, implying that Andy had been physically and mentally abusive throughout their marriage. She reportedly stayed because she believed he would change, and that the belief had cost her years of her life. She posted publicly about what she had endured, and a portion of the audience turned against her for saying it. Now, struggling with mental health issues, Kate moved to Newfoundland, Canada, put Alaska behind her, and started over, making homemade wine and reconnecting with the old family she had not seen in years. Yet all that changed in 2021, when Kate was wrongly diagnosed with thyroid cancer, later dismissed, but left her scarred. This came after years of alleged abuse from her former partner. So many fans wondered, how did the divorce story really play out? And what was her ex-husband's point of view in all this? These are the surprising answers we found, and more. Andy Bassich. A flood took everything he built. An infection almost took his life. And the woman he had spent over a decade within the wilderness went public with allegations that still change the way audiences remember the show. He came to Alaska in 1980 from Washington, D.C., a carpenter who wanted something different and found it in the wilderness near Eagle on the Yukon River. He spent nearly 4 decades there, building a life around mushing, hunting, and looking out for himself. Then came the horrific event of 2009 in the form of the Yukon River flood. This was one of the worst floods in Eagle's recorded history, and the water took nearly everything he had built. He and Kate were stranded for a long time until they got spotted and airlifted out by helicopter along with their 21 sledge dogs that managed to survive. And what was left when the water receded was a structure that needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. And he did it. Then, in late 2018, while trying to free a stuck snow machine from a deep snowpack, he injured his hip. The injury did not heal cleanly, as 2 painful infections set in. One was in the muscle, and the other was deep in the bone. Andy later said they had almost killed him, yet he could not get adequate care in Alaska. So he flew to Florida and spent 6 months there recovering, far from the river and the dogs and the 40 years of accumulated life he had built on the Yukon. He came home on crutches, to a property that had not been maintained in half a year, with a body that could no longer carry the same load. But that wasn't the worst thing he encountered before coming back. When he returned, the Kate Bassich allegations had followed him publicly, and the audience that once cheered for him was now watching him through a different lens. Fans who saw how he spoke to his new girlfriend Denise on camera posted about it publicly and drew direct comparisons to how he had treated Kate. He remained on the show till its final season, but the damage was done, and this time it was permanent. The Bautello sons. Before Litzy Bautello passed away, she had raised 2 sons in one of the most remote communities in the United States. One died at 18 in a car accident before leaving home, and the other was gone before either of them could grow old. She never spoke about it on camera. The events before the loss were equally painful. Johnny was born on June 26, 1991. Leland was born on June 28, 1996. Both of them grew up in Port Protection, in one of the most remote communities in the United States, raised by a woman with only one arm. Yet with that one hand, she hunted, fished, and filleted with intimidating skill with complete body parts. That intimidated people who had both of theirs. As for the lost arm, it happened in a car accident years earlier, yet she rebuilt everything taken from her. And she did, gracefully. Johnny died in 2015 at 18 years old. He was not wearing a seatbelt in a near head-on collision near Klawock, Alaska, and the impact was severe enough that both cars were destroyed. He was put into a medically induced coma. He had a jaw fracture, multiple brain injuries, and fractures in his left femur. He was described as a college valedictorian and died of his injuries in the weeks that followed. Leland died sometime before 2019. Public records are thin about what caused this, and the family kept the details private. She kept fishing. She kept showing up on port protection. She kept cracking jokes with Gary Muellberger, the man her husband said could start a story and she could finish. Lizzie Bautello. She went into surgery for ovarian cancer on the same day her closest friend burned to death in a house fire. Lizzie Bautello spent her final months fighting grief for her sons and dear friend in the same remote Alaskan village she had called home for 40 years. News of her ovarian cancer was released by her husband. According to him, it was when the surgery was scheduled and the date was set when March 17th of that year came around, and Gary Muellberger's house caught fire. It was on that very day that she went into surgery, kicking off her fight with the illness through spring and into early summer. Then, on June 25th, 2021, Lizzie Bautello passed away in the home she had lived in for over 40 years, in port protection. She was 62 years old, and her obituary in the Ketchikan Daily News confirmed she was survived by her husband, John Bean, and both of her sons had preceded her in death. These are just 10 deaths and tragedies associated with the show, but we'd love to hear more from you in the comments below. Which of these losses hit you the most? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, go on and click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it. Until next time, dear viewer, take care.